All right, good morning. That's so funny. It's almost like a judge pounding a gavel or something. It's not what I mean. I just have to interrupt all the good fellowship. I'm sorry to interrupt it, but it always warms my heart to see so many people loving on each other and the conversations and everything. It just shows what kind of congregation we have here. So we're glad to have you this morning here at Market Street Church of Christ during our Bible study hour. This morning we do have a special presentation for you. That's why we've asked all the adult classes to come into the auditorium this morning, is we have a presentation from a potential missionary. And I'm going to let him explain exactly what it is that we're doing. But we have with us this morning Josh Robinson from the St. Louis area, from the Arnold Church of Christ up in Missouri. And he's got his family with him this morning, and he is here to present on some work that they're going to be doing in Africa and Nepal. And so that's why we had you come in this morning. So without taking any more of his time, I present to you Josh Robinson.
All right. Well, good morning, everybody. As Brother Troy said, my name is Josh. We're from the Arnold Church of Christ. And this morning I'd like to talk a little bit about the Manna Project, which is something we are just starting. We appreciate the invitation to come over here and to present this morning. I am brand new to the Manna Project. I mean, I'm pretty much still wet behind my ears. I've been with them for about 6 weeks now since polishing the pulpit. Gage Coldwater is the director of the Manna Project. They're overseen by the congregation in Wewoka. Real funny name, I know. Wewoka, Oklahoma. Overseen by the eldership over there. And they asked me to come on at polishing the pulpit. They know that I was in the process of looking for some opportunities. And I have a background in agriculture and technology and ministry. And you'll see why all those things are important here in just a minute. At least I hope you will. And Gage is like, man, brother, we really need you to come over here and to work with us. And I said, he's telling me all the stuff that he wants me to do. I'm like, man, that's fantastic. This sounds great. I love everything that y'all are doing. And for the last 15 years, I've either been in full-time preaching work or a project manager for a company. And I said, hey, what's the salary for this position? He said, oh, brother, that's the best part. He said, it's whatever you want it to be. He said, you just go out and raise as much support as you need. I said, okay, all right. I've had a lot of opportunity to do mission work. We've done a ton of stuff in Jamaica. I ran a medical campaign down there for years. We've done a lot of work through Nicaragua and Latin American missions. So I'm not a stranger to mission work in and of itself, but this will be my first stint as a missionary. We'll be here, but I'll be in Africa 5 or 6 times a year from, I dropped the clicker, from 2 weeks to a month at a time. So I want to talk about the Manna Project. I said I'm kind of new, and I don't want to be boring this morning. I know you've sat through mission reports. In 1963, we traveled to Africa. In 1964, this building, I don't even have a lot of really cool pictures to show you because I'll be the guy taking a lot of the really cool pictures. So next year, I'll come back, I'll show you all kind of cool stuff. But today, I just want to talk about it, and I really want it to be a lot about the Bible and why we do all the cool stuff that we do. All right. Let's start about with some facts. The fact of the matter is that domestically we're losing a little over 300 congregations a year. And this is the doom and gloom part of it. Right? I don't like to think about it. I like to think about places like Arnold and Margaret Street and all these places where you go and you visit and you know everybody and we seem like we're doing really well. I preach at a lot of smaller congregations in and around the St. Louis area. And sometimes, we'll have 8 or 9 folks on a Sunday morning. And I'm just wondering when is the last day that congregation is going to meet? It's coming up soon. When I roll into a congregation, and I still I'm 40 now, and I got some gray in my beard, and I still like to think like I'm young, but when I roll in and I'm the youth group, I worry about the future of the congregation. We're losing about 300 congregations a year domestically. Think about the mission works that those congregations represent. What's going to happen to those mission works, domestic and international, when those congregations are no longer there? What's going to happen to the mission works that Margaret Street and Arnold and Inner Point and all these places that we support when we're not here anymore to do that? That ought to scare us a little bit. That ought to make us think of how and what we do with mission work. And what we do with the Manna Project is a little bit different than what other folks are doing because we have this in mind. What can we do to help these brethren overseas be completely self-sufficient, where they don't see American money? And how do we help them be who they need to be in that place? So many times, and you've seen it and I've seen it, we've all seen it, you go to a congregation of the Lord in Nicaragua or Jamaica or India or Bangladesh or somewhere else, and it looks and sounds and is exactly like an American congregation. Now, the teaching and the doctrine should be the same, right? And the pattern of worship should be the same. But I shouldn't expect a westernized congregation when I roll into some place in the middle of Africa. It needs to be completely native and local to what those folks are trying to do. We don't need to have reliance on. I've been places where the Church of Christ building was the nicest building in town, which is way cool. Sometimes it is cool, right? It's one of the only buildings in town with some electric lighting. Or they got a window AC unit in there. It's like, we should be separate and apart, but not quite in those ways. Because what happens when the congregation that's supporting that work, when it's no longer there? Or what happens when the pandemic happens and numbers drop and we can't support things like we used to? Well, then that building no longer has electricity. You know, those things no longer work. We want to prepare congregations, we want to prepare preachers to be able to be self-sufficient, self-supporting, which is what we do with the Manna Project. The Manna Project, we operate 3 schools of preaching. In Africa, we operate 1 in Nepal. And we teach these guys how to preach. It's preaching school curriculum. I went to the Memphis School of Preaching. There are several other good, great, sound schools of preaching in the Brotherhood. A lot of our colleges and universities can teach guys to preach. We know what preaching school is. We also teach these fellows as they come through the preaching school agricultural practices. We teach them how to work the soil where they're at, literally, right? To be sowers, to go out and to plant, to grow crops, to raise animals. I told somebody else, we teach them how to plant crops and animals. That's how you get chickens, right? You plant the egg in the ground and the chicken tree pops up. And, sometimes we do that. Not really. But we teach them how to be farmers. We teach them how to support themselves. We teach them how to support their congregations. As a matter of fact, a lot of the schools are self-supporting in their utilities because of the agricultural practices that they're doing. These guys are out there growing what they need to survive. They're growing what their members need to survive, and they don't see American dollars to support these congregations. We keep that entire process native. We teach them how to do that work to support themselves. Our students that go through the school, the located preachers there, are not the guys on Facebook asking you for $50. Anybody get those Facebook messages? These guys live in a part of the world where they're making $5 or $10 a day, and that's normal. But they ask you for $50, and they ask me, and they're making thousands of dollars a month asking for handouts on Facebook. That's not the way mission work is supposed to happen. That's not the way preacher training is supposed to happen. There's no American missionary rolling in at his daddy Warbucks, just like, all right, here's y'all's money, let's make everything happen. We want these guys to be completely self-sufficient and autonomous, which is exactly the way things work in Scripture, right? I'd like to take a good chunk of our morning and get into some Bible study, talk about some mission fundamentals. Now, I am involved in mission work, and I feel like there are some obligatory verses we need to cover, so you feel like you're getting a mission report out of this, right? John 3:16, somebody help me out. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, right? That whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God so loved the world. That includes folks in Cameroon and Uganda and Tanzania and Nepal and Nicaragua and Bangladesh and all these places. But never forget that for God so loved the world includes your neighbors and your friends and your family members, right? The world starts next door. What's Mark 16, 15, and 16 say? Go into all the world. What's Matthew 28, 18 through 20 say? Same thing. Go into all the world. That is the Great Commission. Go ye into all the world preaching and teaching the gospel to every creature. Whoever believes and is baptized shall be saved. After they're baptized into Christ, you teaching them, right? To observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. Lo, I'm with you always, even until the end of the world. What's going on in Acts chapter 8 and verse 4? Acts chapter 8, Stephen is stoned. There's a persecution arising against the church. And what happens in Acts 8 and verse 4? They that were scattered abroad go everywhere preaching the word, or they preach the word as they're traveling. I always thought that was really interesting, right? It's the members of the church that are scattered abroad, and the elders and those folks are staying put in Jerusalem. Why do they have to leave? Why do they have to flee their homes? By the way, this is Jewish persecution, right? This is the persecution arising from the Jews, and they're fleeing, and they're going everywhere else. They're fleeing because they're Christians, right? Because they're teaching and preaching the gospel of Christ. And what are they doing as they're running for their lives? Continuing to preach and teach the gospel of Christ, the thing that got them in trouble to start with. I hope all of those verses are familiar. Most of you could quote those back to me, so that's really awesome. One of the things I really like to hear, people kind of quoting Scripture, and I love to hear Bible pages turning. You know, I know some of us have moved on to electronic means of Bibles now, so it's hard for me to hear the little swish on your phone or your iPad. But I do, man, I like that. A verse maybe we're not as familiar with, but I really like is Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 10. Ephesians 3 is a great chapter, Paul revealing the mysteries of Christ, if you will. But in verse 10, he said, so that through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might now be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. Whose job is it to reveal the manifold wisdom of God? According to that verse, the church. Who's the church? And everybody raises their hand, right? Is it the elder's job to make known the manifold wisdom of God? Trick question, right? Yes, because they're part of the church. Is it the elder's sole responsibility to do that? Is it Troy's sole responsibility to do that? What about the deacons? I'm a deacon, right? We throw all the stuff that we don't want to do on the deacons. Is it the deacon's responsibility to be? No, it's that every one of our responsibility, because we are the church, to make known the manifold wisdom of God. We do that in a lot of different ways. We do that through individual personal Bible study and encouragement. We do that through supporting of missionaries. We do that through what I like to call electronic evangelism. If you're not using social media for evangelism right now, we're missing the boat. We got to be on Facebook and Instagram and those places promoting the work of the church. There are all sorts of opportunities for us to evangelize because that is, according to Paul in Ephesians 3, the work of the church. Through the church, the manifold wisdom of God is going to be made known. And that's great because we all have places we can do this and we should be doing this, right? I'm going to go over to Tanzania and Uganda and Cameroon and Nepal and work with these men so that they can reach their local communities. Not everybody gets an opportunity to do that. You know, someplace that I can't go and teach the gospel is to your neighbors. I don't know who your neighbors are. You know who your neighbors are. If your neighbor, the one that you're going to talk to about football or NASCAR or fishing or hunting or insert your stamp collecting hobby here, whatever you have that makes you happy, you're going to go and talk to your neighbors about. I don't know that person. I don't have a relationship with them. If they're going to hear the gospel, it's going to be through you. Because that's a place I can't reach. That's a relationship that I don't have. I told somebody that one time. I said, well, Josh, I could bring you to my house and introduce you. I'm like, do you realize how much work that you have just involved here? Here's your neighbor that you already have a relationship, but you're going to bring me, some stranger, to meet your neighbor to share the gospel. You could have baptized this guy by the time I get a chance to meet him. That's what we need to be doing. And I want to take us to Paul's approach to the work. And I want to look at the book of Acts. All right, Paul's approach to the work. In Acts chapter 13, we're going to look at Acts 13, 15, Titus, and then we're really going to sit down in Acts chapter 20 for a minute. But in Acts chapter 13, while they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. Then after fasting and prayer, they laid their hands on them and they set off. The start of the missionary journeys there, by divine inspiration from God, right? God said, I want these guys to go do this thing. And so they go out and they do all that. And they've come back and they've given their report. And we get to chapter 15. And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord, and let's see how they are. And just so you know, I tell everybody this. I went to the Memphis School of Preaching, and I memorized, it seems like, 90% of the Bible is what they had us do. And it's all in the King James Version. I usually study out of the ESV. And so what you're going to get today is the Robinson Paraphrase version, because those things get real confused in my head. I'll start reading in the ESV, and I'll finish a quote in the King James. So if you're trying to find, like, what version is he using, it's somewhere between those two. It just happens in my noggin that way. They said, let us go and check on these brethren. Acts chapter 13, here goes Paul on this missionary journey. And we understand there's a difference between a mission work and a located work. Paul is the missionary that's going to check on these folks because all these people are where they're at. They're not leaving Ephesus. They're not leaving Tyre. They're not leaving this town in Cyprus where they live. That's where that congregation lives. That's where they abide. That's where they're flourishing at. And Paul says, we need to go check on these guys. Now, we know what happens after that, right? They start assembling their team. There's some disagreement. Paul didn't want John Mark to go, and now there's two teams going out. And that was all right. Sometimes we don't always get along. Did Paul still love John Mark? Did he want to travel the world with him at that point in time? No. Is that okay? It's all right. I think it's interesting when you look at the end of Paul's letters. Who does he say needs to come and see him because he's profitable for the work? John Mark. They worked it out. But that's what's going on, right? And then we get to Titus chapter 1, beginning in verse 5. This is why I left you in Crete, Paul is telling Titus, so that you might put what remained in order and appoint elders in every town as I have directed you. And then we get into the qualifications of elders and deacons, and we're real keen on that part, right? I left you there so you could go around and appoint elders and deacons and put what remained into order. Make sure these guys are autonomous and self-sufficient, that these guys have everything that they need to be profitable for the work of the Lord. What do they need to be profitable? What do they need to be self-sufficient? I want to look at Acts 20, 33 through 35. This is Paul on his way back to Jerusalem. He stopped. He had the elders from Ephesus come over, and he's having this discussion with them. And we're familiar with part of this, right? Because he's warning them. You know, there's going to be wolves in sheep clothing that are going to come unto you. You need to be careful. You need to be watchful. And then in 33 through 35, he's kind of explaining what his process, what his mentality has been like in the mission field. He said, I have coveted no man's silver or gold or apparel. You yourselves know that these hands have ministered to my necessities, to those who are with me. In all things I have shown you that by the working hard in this way, we help the weak. Remember the words of the Lord Jesus, how he himself has said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. I want to break this down and look at this for a minute. And look and see what all Paul's ministry entailed here. He said, I have coveted nothing, right? I've coveted no man's silver or gold or apparel. This is a ministry with humility. Have you ever known a preacher, elder, eldership, deacon, member of the church that didn't have humility? How hard is it to be an effective soldier for Christ without humility? And it's hard. It's hard to be the person that the Lord needs you to be. It's hard to do the work that God wants you to do if you are all about yourself. Now, we live in a society today that is what? Self-centered. I love social media. I'm a big proponent, like I just mentioned a while ago, that we should be using it for the Lord and social media and evangelism and all this stuff. But you get some of these things. Instagram is my favorite example of this. Instagram is designed to promote self. How many times have you been sick in bed and you have taken a picture of this pile of tissues and put it up on Instagram? No, you don't do that. You know, here's this cool thing, right? You take pictures of the highlights of your life. You wake up today and you feel skinny and you suck your gut in and you take a picture and you put it on Instagram. You know, at the end of the day, when you've had all the chicken wings you can handle, you know, you don't put that picture up on. No, right? We live in a culture that is very self-centered, where we covet what everybody else has. Now, this was not an occupation when I went through high school. You know, they have the job fair and the career day. And where was influencer at or YouTuber at? Like that wasn't even a possibility when I went to high school. An influencer. Well, what is my job if I'm an influencer? to influence you to buy these products and to live this kind of lifestyle. That's the world we live in today. Paul says, I have coveted no man's silver or gold or apparel. It's kind of the opposite of the world we live in today. That was his approach to the work. James said in James 4 and verse 10, right, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord. And then what happens? He will lift you up. Is it your job to lift yourself up and brag on you? No, it's the Lord's responsibility, right? You humble yourself, God will make sure that you get whatever sort of recognition it is that you need. He said, I have coveted no man's anything. This is a ministry with accountability. It's above the board. I have been aware, and I'm sure y'all have been aware of mission works, congregations, preachers that were maybe not above board. He said, listen, not only have I not taken or stolen or done anything bad to anybody, I have not even coveted what these folks have had. Are there lots of people in the world who had more than what Paul had? Yeah. We look at 2 Corinthians chapter 11, it's Paul's whole list of privations that he suffered. Hot, cold, hungry, tired, beaten, shipwrecked. Paul lived a pretty rough life. But he said, during this point, right, I have been content, Philippians chapter 4. He said, I have coveted no man's anything. Matthew chapter 6, no one can serve two masters, verse 24. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, or God and money. Paul did not have that problem. When he said, I have coveted no man's anything, he speaks to his humility and he speaks to his accountability in this work. And that's something I think we need to keep in mind. He says, you yourselves know that how these hands have ministered. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes I like to work with my hands. For years and years and years, I was just full-time preacher. The heaviest thing I lifted was a book. I dressed like this a lot of the times, For me to go out and work in the garden, change the spark plugs on my truck or something, I come in, I look at my fingernails, they're all dirty. I'm like, oh yeah, man, I did something today. As a guy, man, it just made me feel much better about life. It's like, oh man, I'm out in the woods, I'm chasing deer. This is I have worked with my hands. There's some satisfaction that comes with that. Paul says y'all, and I know Paul probably wasn't from Tennessee, but I'm sure he said y'all. He said, y'all know that I have labored with my hands. Y'all know that I was a tent maker. Y'all know that I have provided for myself. And we know that Philippians chapter 4 and other places that Paul had help from congregations as he was traveling. But he said, in this work, I have helped to support myself. This is a ministry with labor, right? Jesus said, John 9 verse 4, we must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night comes when no man can work. 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 10. For even when we were with you, we would have given you this commandment. If anyone is not willing to work, let him not eat. Paul said, I understand that things take effort. And I am willing and have put in this effort. This is a ministry with service. He said these hands have ministered to. What is a minister? A minister is just a servant. Galatians 6 and verse 10 says, we have therefore opportunity, right? Let us do good unto all men. And he doesn't stop there. What else does he say? Especially those of the household of faith. Paul said, I have done good to all men. These hands have ministered not only to what I've needed, but to the needs of others. But he says our necessities, right, have been met. He said, these hands have ministered to my necessities. Did he say my excesses? I have worked and worked and worked so that I could buy this Maserati. If you got a Maserati, I ain't knocking you. I'm sure you got a really awesome job and you can afford a Maserati. Not too awful long ago, I had cause to be in Colorado. And there was this little store, and they were selling coffee tables made out of engines from cars like Maseratis. This coffee table that I was looking at, because I need a new coffee table in my house, was $275,000. Paul said, I did not make tents so that I could buy a $300,000 coffee table for my house. Paul said, I have labored for my necessities. He says that our needs were met. He had a ministry that had contentment. Philippians 4 and verse 11, not speaking in respect of want or need, for I have learned in whatsoever station I am to be content. And I always thought that was great in verse 11 where he said, I have learned. Do we always have contentment in our lives? I want somebody to go back to the 5-year-old class and take away their cookies and their toys and see how much contentment those little kids have. Now, my kids are not very small anymore. They're much bigger. But, you know, contentment is something we learn. And Paul learned that. He learned that through suffering the things that he did, through studying the life of Christ and living after Paul or Christ the way he should. In Matthew chapter 6, 25 through 34, we're not going to do all of that for the sake of time this morning, but keep that in mind. Jesus said, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious. Careful about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink or what you will put on your body. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? And he goes on to talk about the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, right in verse 33 and 34. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things shall be added unto you. Do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious about itself. Sufficient for the day is its own troubles. I love 33 and 34. God helps and blesses the righteous. You want things to work out? Put God first. Is it miraculous? No. Things just seem to work out. It's going to be all right. And even if things in this life never, ever do work out, we had an elder at Arnold for years and years. He stepped down recently because of his wife's health. But we'd be talking about something, and I'd mention retirement. You know, I was a preacher. There is no retirement. I'm going to work till I'm dead. He said, but Josh, your retirement is out of this world. And you know what he meant, and I know what he meant. My family who are not members of the church, they don't know what he meant. I'm like, Josh, but what about your 401k? It's like, I don't worry about it. My retirement's out of this world. Even if things don't work out here, I get to go to heaven. I get to be with the Lord forever. I get to hear, well done, thy good and faithful servant. A ministry with contentment. Our needs were met. It's a ministry with understanding what Paul said his needs were. Like you need to know what your needs are. James 4, 1 through 4, right? What causes quarrels and strifes and fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire, you do not have, so you murder. You covet, and you cannot obtain, so you fight. And you quarrel, you do not have because you do not ask, and you do not receive because you ask amiss or wrongly to spend it on your passions. I have passions. We'll talk about that in just a second. Man, I got a lot of passions. Passions cost money. What are my needs, though? What we want to do is we want to train folks. We want to be folks that meet our needs so that we can, in fact, help others. A mission with compassion, right? James 1:27, religion, pure religion before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unspotted from the church. Wait, that's wrong. Strike that. To keep oneself unspotted from the world. The other thing I said was the direct opposite. You should be unspotted from the world. What's it mean to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction? Does that mean to call them or send them a card? Say, hey, how you doing? Take care of their needs. I love it. To visit the fatherless and the children, the fatherless and the widows in their affliction means to see the needs and to fill the needs. Should you call and check on these folks? Should you send them a card? By all means, yes. But when you show up to this brother's house who's lost his wife and the dishes are piled up in the sink because he hadn't touched the dishwasher in the last 45 years, while you're talking to him, you're doing his dishes. When you go to visit some sister who's just lost her husband and the yard's knee deep because she ain't seen a lawnmower in 30 years. Sisters, you know, you're going to go and you're going to visit. She's going to offer you a glass of sweet tea because that's just what people do. That'd be great. Let me go, where's your mower at? Let me go mow it. And I'll come in here, I'll visit with you, and I'll drink that sweet tea. That's what it means to visit those folks. To be seen and using that hard work to the benefit of others. Ooh! And my input is not detected. All right, there it is. So this is the Pauline approach to mission. And if y'all don't think I'm a real preacher, I want you to look at this alliteration right here. Right? Preparing preachers per Paul's pattern. We love peas as preachers. This is preacher perfection right here on a professional scale. But that's what we're doing, right? I just want to make sure y'all knew I was a real preacher and I could alliterate all my points. But this is what we do. We want to train men in America, in Uganda, in Cameroon, Tanzania, and Nepal. We want to train them to do it Paul's way. Not some American way, which we think is cool. We want them to do just what Paul did. We want them to go around the world, their area, these local villages, and be self-sufficient in what they do. So let's talk about being fired up a little bit for the work. What gets you excited? I like hunting, I like fishing, I like college football. I don't know how y'all feel about the Tennessee Volunteers, but I feel very strongly in favor. And y'all see what we did to LSU yesterday? Man, I feel very good. Now, I know, unfortunately, there are Alabama fans in this room. And y'all might be able to go to heaven, I'm sure. Maybe, I don't know. But for the first time in a very long time, I am looking forward to next week when Tennessee plays Alabama. And I know y'all going to call me later and be like, you shouldn't have looked forward to that. Right? I feel kind of strongly about Tennessee football. I love me some hunting and fishing. I love Dodge trucks. There we go. Somebody's going to heaven. Right? There are things that we feel passionately about. Matthew 6 and verse 21, right? Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Where your heart is, there your treasure is. You show me your checkbook. Never mind, nobody uses a checkbook anymore. You show me your bank app, I will show you where your priorities are at. I will show you what your hobbies are. We had to go to Walmart last night. Why do you need another fishing pole? It's like, you seen the size of the ocean out here? Can I have too many fishing poles? No. Do I need another gun? That's a foolish question. You know, we all have things that we get real super fired up about, right? And I could sit here and talk to you about hunting and fishing and all this stuff all day long, and y'all got stuff that you're passionate about. Yes, let's talk about it all the time. How do you feel about evangelism? Oh, well, right? If I were to ask you to put a percentage on the amount of time you talk about football, your truck, your kids, your grandkids, ooh, I'm stepping on toes now, I know, I'm sorry, versus how much time you spend talking to other people about the Lord, how fired up are you about evangelism? Matthew 28, 18 through 20, we just talked about it. We won't go into it again. Jesus told them to go. How do you feel about that? As a child, how did you feel when your parents told you to go and do something? As an employee, how do you feel when your boss tells you, hey, I need you to go do something? As a husband, how do you feel when your wife says, hey, I need you to go do something? Does that color your thoughts and feelings towards something? We get so wound up and excited about things. Man, I'm still talking about that LSU game. I'll be talking about that for a while because next week may not be so great. I got to have something to hold on to. But right when we walk in, it's like, oh, hey, did you see that ball game? Walk in Monday morning, hey, did you see that ball game? Hey, man, did you hit the woods this week? Did you hit the water? Oh, man, show me a picture of them fish. Hey, did you go to church on Sunday? Man, what was the sermon about? What did you learn about in Bible class? Man, hey, what's your favorite scripture? I had a chance to go hunting with a brother the other day, which is awesome. I love going hunting with members of the church. We're dragging this thing out of the woods. He said, hey, Josh, what's your favorite Bible verse? Hey, man, that's cool. I like these conversations. Let's talk about this. What do we get so excited about? Do you love souls? Paul said, Romans 9 and verse 3, I wish that I myself could be accursed or cut off from Christ for my brethren's sake. If I could lose my soul to save the rest of the Jews, man, I'd do it in a heartbeat. That's how much he loves souls. When Paul walked into Walmart, he just didn't see people, just regular average Joes, just doing their thing. He saw people that were going to hell, and he needed to fix that. Do we view souls that way? Are we fired up about the work of the church? I said I wasn't going to have pictures, but I got a few pictures. Here's a fellow baptizing lady in a pond in Tanzania. Does that get you fired up? If I had to replay a sports center up here, would you be more excited about that? If so, we got problems. If you got a jacked up truck, you got all the bells and whistles on it, and I put a picture of that up on the screen, would you be more excited about this baptism? Man, the biggest fish you ever caught, I put that picture on the screen. Does this baptism get you more fired up than that? It should. That's what we need to be. We need to have we need to be wound up about the things that are going on out in the world. And I realize it's just a little bit dark there, but does that look like a good roofing structure, or does that look like a bunch of tarps with holes in it? A bunch of tarps with holes in it. You know, this is the gospel meeting. You know what they don't have in that? Well, you know what those holes are? That holes are the air conditioning. Man, you don't think they don't have creature comforts in Tanzania and Uganda, man, you are wrong. That is air conditioning. Letting that breeze blow right through there. There's the preaching school. There's the students working. Here's some of our guys sitting with some ladies as we're going through a harvest. Teaching a vacation Bible school while we're out there doing this work. Let's talk about mission facilities for a minute. I've been preaching for a while. Let's spend the last 10 minutes or so actually talking about what we're doing here and why we're doing it and what it looks like. Like I said, we do 3 schools of preaching in Africa. We do one in Nepal. I want to kind of tell you about them. And you're thinking, man, where is all this stuff? Let me help you kind of visualize it just a little bit. So we have Cameroon here. We have Uganda, we have Tanzania, and way over here at the top of the map, we have Nepal. So we have the Model School of Preaching in Cameroon, the Rwenzori School of Preaching in Uganda, the Talwanda School of Preaching in Tanzania, and the Jaffa School in Nepal. We're going to have 10 to 20 guys going through the school at any given time. They're going back out to the local villages. When they graduate, several hundred men have went through this program since 2010. I can't tell you, we've lost track of how many folks are baptized as a result of what these men are doing. Because the truth does not exist where they're going back to. They're coming out of these villages, and they're going back, and there may be a denominational building, there may be a Seventh-day Adventist, Baptist, Methodist, you name it. But when these guys go back, and they start preaching the truth, and they start talking to this other guy that preaches in town, dozens upon dozens of denominational church buildings have been converted to the work of the church because the truth is that powerful. Talking to Troy earlier, just when you go and you do some mission work, you see things work on a different scale and a different timeline than sometimes what we see here. We are so indoctrinated with Christianity in this culture, even folks who are atheistic and agnostic are familiar with all tenets of the New Testament, right? And Jesus and church and, baptism. Everybody more or less knows what those things are. They've heard of the Church of Christ. They've heard of all this stuff. But when you go over there, man, the truth is new, and it's, whoa, what is this? You guys are doing things way different than we're doing. Why are you? And you sit down and you study the Scriptures with folks that are like, all right, let's do something about that. How many times have you been inviting a neighbor or a coworker or family member for months or years before they finally come to? Sometimes over here, it happens so much quicker, and it's impressive to see. So let's talk about Rwenzori in Uganda. And this is all super awesome. My first trip to these places is going to be in January. We were going to go in November, but guess whose passport was expired? Because I haven't needed a passport in a while. Uganda school, the Rwenzori school in Uganda, they are self-reliant for food, water, electricity. What does that mean? That means that what they do with farming, right? They can substitute and subsist on what they're doing with farming to help raise a lot of their utilities and infrastructure. About 20 students, their main crop is vanilla. How many people raise vanilla? This is what they raise in Uganda. It's $1,900 a month to run this school. That covers expenses and health and all that kind of good stuff. They talk about mission work being all kinds of fun. Uganda was on the plan. We had it on the itinerary. I was looking super forward to being in Uganda. This week, they had an Ebola outbreak. Yes! I'm on a giant text thread with all the guys who work with the Manna Project. I'm like, man, you guys know how to have fun. So I'm hopeful that gets better, that we're able to travel to Uganda in January. Let's talk about the Model School of Preaching in Cameroon. In Cameroon, we have almost the same kind of thing. They're raising bananas as their main crop of export, into the community. And they do quite good with that to the point where they don't need quite as much support. And again, the students don't see any of this. This is just for the infrastructure for the school itself. Some medical expenses to cover some of the teachers as they travel to and from things. Nobody actually gets a stipend or an allowance or anything like that. This simply goes to run the school, which if you're looking at these numbers, you're like, man, you're running a preaching school on $1,900 a month. That's why. We're not giving people stipends. We're not giving people allowances. We're covering costs. And that's what we want to do. The Talwanda School in preaching in Tanzania, this is in eastern Tanzania. 20 students with families. Their main export is corn. And then this is super awesome. In Nepal, we've been running a nighttime school. They do monthly seminars. A lot of it's done via Zoom. But we've had a brother in the Jaffa province. So if you think of Nepal and the Himalayas and Mount Everest, yeah, it's not that Nepal. This is what it looks like. It looks like India because it's on the border of India and Bangladesh. But he's donated a little over 10 acres for us. And when we go in January, we're going to start the process of building a school so we can house 20 to 25 students. We're going to have a great international pool because it's on the border of India and Bangladesh right there. So not only are we going to train the folks there in Nepal, but we're going to train folks from India, we're going to train folks from Bangladesh and around the area. And we're super excited to be able to start this school in a permanent setting. Again, we've been training men in this area for a number of years now. But to be able to have them come together on a daily basis and live and learn these things. Because it's not, again, just not the gospel, right? It's all of the agricultural practices. We teach to these guys how to grow their own food, but it's chickens, it's hogs, it's rabbits. Scare the kids, but it's guinea pigs. You ever raise guinea pigs for food? They do. You go over there and you're like, hey, pick out what you want for lunch. It's like the tank at Red Lobster, except it looks like PetSmart because they got these guinea pigs running around. So I want the little spotty guy. And that's what shows up on your plate for lunch. It's a little bit different than jumping down to Whataburger for lunch. Let's talk in our last 4 minutes here about mission facilitators. This is the awkward part. This is the part where I say, I need your help, and I do. The Manna Project is, in fact, my full-time job. This is how I pay my bills. This is how I feed my family. And I can't do it without y'all. We need your prayers. If you can't do anything else, we need some encouragement because we are brand new at this. As of October 1st, I am living solely on Manna Project money. So this is important for me and my family. This is a work that we obviously feel very involved in. We talked about our passions earlier, what we're wound up. You know what excites me more than Tennessee football? Being able to help these folks engage in this work. There is a QR code there. You can scan that. We have some papers that we'll leave on the table outside or hand folks. As I mentioned, the Manna Project itself is overseen by the elders in Wewoka, Oklahoma. But those elders have asked that each person who works full-time have their own overseeing congregation. Why? Because when Sister Sally sends in a check for Josh, and she forgets to write Josh on it, then Josh doesn't get paid that month, right? So my elders at Arnold, where I've been at for the last 15 years as a preacher and a deacon, they're going to oversee our particular funds. So if you're wondering, hey, is this work overseen by eldership? It's actually overseen by two. Because the Wewoka congregation will get a report of my funds and my expenses every year. So they know what I'm doing. So it's actually overseen by two. Checks can be sent to the Arnold Church of Christ. The address is on there. You can actually go to PayPal because we live in this magic world of the internet. You can scan that QR code. It'll take you right to a page where you can donate. Monthly helps immensely. One-time gifts are great. But this is the awkward part. But it doesn't have to be awkward. People say, well, you're just a missionary. You're just going around begging. I don't like that. I'm sure Troy doesn't like that. You know what beggars are? Beggars are at the end of their rope and they have nowhere else to go. That's why they beg. This is an honor and a privilege and a work of the Lord. I get to partner with folks, good folks, who help me do this. It's not begging. It's just a work of the church. And I am thankful that y'all had the ability to bring me in this morning. I talked to Michael several times. The elders had the thankfulness for me to bring me in so I could tell you about all the cool stuff that we are doing at the Mission Project, or the Manna Project, in this mission work. And this is the fun part, but this is how I get to do all what I do. And I want to explain to you that I did grow up on a farm in Tennessee. I know what it's like to raise things. People in Arnold say, why do you have a garden, Josh? And I live in a subdivision in St. Louis, right? My garden is boxes around my fence row. Because my dad worked 7 hours a day, or 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for years. I'm like, why do you have a farm? And then I get my own house. I'm like, why do you have this? I got to get out and do something. I got to have something to piddle with, right? I know what it's like to raise things. I have a background in technology. For 5 years, I was a project manager for a production company. We did AV video production. I've preached for the last 15 years, every Sunday somewhere. That's my background. That's why I'm involved with the Manna Project, because I have the skills that they need to take this thing to the next level. And that's what we're trying to do. Super involved in mission work and always really have been. What I do with the mission work is I'm the director of communications. I'm going to film curriculum here so that we can make a digital curriculum, so we can show people, so that even when we can't be there, they can watch videos and learn how to preach the gospel, learn how to grow this stuff. I can take videos over there. Gage said, Josh, we need somebody who knows what end of a camera to use. So that when we've been doing this for 15 years, but we don't have any cool pictures or videos because somebody's thumb's always in the thing. So when I go over there, I'll be doing some filming. I'm also involved, obviously, in the preaching and teaching, the agriculture. I'll be slopping the hogs with everybody else. But we need your help in order to make all this stuff happen, and we're really thankful that y'all had us over this morning. Appreciate it.